Now, 11 West African nationals deported from the U.S. have taken Ghana's government to court, saying that their detention was unlawful. Their lawyer, Oliver-Barker Vormawor, says that the group were held in a military camp even though they had not broken Ghanaian law, a claim that raises serious questions about due process and how these returns were handled. Now, the government has not publicly answered the lawsuit, and officials say that Ghana may accept another 40 deportees under the U.S. arrangement, a step that opposition MPs want paused until Parliament formally ratifies the deal. Now, should Ghana or Accra suspend further transfers and give Parliament and the public a say before more people are sent there? We'll find out. We have our guests with us already. Dr. Bakarr Bah, Presidential Research Professor of Sociology in Northern Illinois University in the U.S., and also Patrick Stephenson, Policy Analyst in Accra, Ghana. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, let's begin with you, Dr. Bah. Now, Ghana went from being hero to villain real quick. Let's hear your thoughts on this lawsuit.
Well, I think there are several things here. Certainly, if the people who have been deported to Ghana are held under conditions that are not compatible with Ghanaian laws in terms of the way civilians are held, they haven't really broken any Ghanaian law, so I think definitely that is a problem. So I think the question of their deportation and the question of the way they are held, in my mind, those are two different things. And I have concerns on both sides, but I separate them a little bit. So fundamentally, if the question is that they are held in military camps, they are not really accused of any military violations or laws. I don't think that is right. They should be released or helped to get back to their home countries, at the minimum.
Okay, now let's hear your own thoughts, Patrick, if you can hear me.
So I can hear you loud and clear, and I think perhaps my preliminary comments on this one would be that Ghana indeed belongs to a community of nations in this world, and so the things we do must necessarily be in accordance, with the dictates of international law, and in this particular instance, questions about the protection of the human rights of individuals. But there are two fundamental things perhaps to articulate here. One being the question of the process by which, the Ghana government has gone into this agreement with the U.S. government. And again, regardless of the nomenclature of this, agreement, you did indicate earlier that, the members of parliament are already calling for some kind of a preliminary inquiry, or they should have at least known about this agreement before ultimately they ratify same for it to be binding on the country. We've had precedents on this in the past. There's a requirement by law that every agreement, no matter the nomenclature, no matter how we categorize it, by the executive, to the extent that it involves another foreign party, must somehow go through Parliament for some approval. And so it's very interesting to see how that trajectory, progresses. If somebody takes up that action and goes to Supreme Court for a determination on whether or not this agreement is obviously legally binding on the country. But quite apart from that is the substantive question of, the human rights violations that have equally come up there. And again, we have some precedent as well by determinations of the courts here that require the protection of the rights and interests of individuals, before they are even repatriated to whatever countries they may be coming from. And so I think it's important to balance those interests. And I think that is what, the lawyer for the plaintiffs going to the court is really asking for, that at least these individuals are already in the country. A number of things need to happen. They're asking for an injunction to prevent the state from sending them back to the countries of origin. Some of them have claimed, possible maltreatment when they get back to these countries, and that may be in violation of international law. And so they're asking for an injunction on that. Again, there is the question of where they are currently. We know there have been some indications that they are perhaps in some military camp or whatnot. The details have not been published. The details of the agreement itself is not public. If they had gone to Parliament, citizens would have had a bit more preview on that. We don't know the details, and similarly, it's not clear where exactly they're being held. And so one thing they are also asking for is for the state to produce them and bring them to court so we can know where they are. Beyond these two reliefs they're asking for, we can look at the substantive human rights questions that are in there and whether or not it was valid for the states to actually enter into these agreements. And I think that's where we are at today. At the end of the business day today, we understand there should be some court hearings on the issues I've talked about. I'm not sure how that's going to travel so far.
Well, speaking of the human rights questions and also the validity, I'm going to push this to Dr. Bah. Lawyers have actually said that, several of the deportees had previously won protections in the U.S. immigration court. So if this is true, how could they end up on a plane to Ghana? What gaps does this expose?
So I think we have to understand that this is a political problem, and that doesn't negate the legal aspect of things. But these kinds of things happen because they have become political issues. So when things become political, depending the extent of it goes, they may or may not actually operate within the confines of rule of law as we know it. And this is really what hard politics is. Now, again, I'm not justifying it. I'm not saying it's right, but I just want to make the distinction that these things happen because of the political nature of what has happened. So to come back to your question here, in the United States, on the current U.S. policies, there is a very hardline approach to the enforcement of immigration laws and policies. So in that sense, I mean, the way the current government approaches things, it's far much more different than the way previous governments have handled them. So it is, there are all kinds of reports here in the United States of people who have been deported, who are mistakenly, they were even U.S. citizens mistaken. But again, the point is that all of this is happening because of a political positioning or political position. Now, on the Ghanaian side, I think, as my good friend was speaking there, how, again, the legal question is very important, but again, you have to understand how did Ghana come to accept these people? And certainly, again, as the gentleman there was describing, there's a process, for agreements, ratifications, and so forth. But what typically we see in the ground politics here, that is between the United States and other countries, in this case, Ghana and similar countries, is that you do have a kind of international political leverage, which is exerted that actually, makes some countries, comply or do, according to U.S. policy. So again, that is a political issue. So I guess the summary of what I want to say here is that, the people who have been deported arrive in Ghana. If it is from a strictly legal standpoint, they do have a lot of rights here in the United States, which may have, possibly may have been even violated. But the context here is a political question, and I think this is what takes us in a difficult terrain, meaning that we will often see due process violated no matter where, because overall, to just walk it back a little bit, if you look historically, it's not a normal practice to round up civilians, immigrants, and send them to a third-party country. Yeah. That's extremely rare. Typically, those things happen in the context of, wars, for example, during the war on terror and so forth. So, but normally it is not for ordinary people who are just immigrants, whose violations may just be an immigration law or simple, criminal kind of like regular criminal kind of things or traffic things. So again, the politics matters here a lot.
Okay. Now let's come back to you, Patrick. In fact, one of the, deportees told reporters, that some of them were getting sick and you even have malaria due to bad water and food. While we have this going on and the, them suing the Ghana, them suing the country. President Mahama's administration has also said that it will take another 40 deportees. Do you think that Accra should suspend that plan while the courts examine the current detentions? And what precedents does, Ghana risk setting?
It's an interesting question. Perhaps three comments on that. The first one being this idea that, they are going to expand or increase the number of people that the country will receive off the back of this agreement they have entered into. As it is, nobody has actually gone to the Supreme Court or any, court of competent jurisdiction to challenge the validity of the agreement. We know the minority in Parliament has questioned it, right, and have indicated that it needs to be brought to, and ratified. Like I did say, about 10, 12 years ago, we had a similar arrangement, which, the government then categorized as some kind of a note verbal, for which reason they wanted to circumvent the requirement of law that mandates them to bring this for a proper conversation and for the purpose of accountability. Now, there's a reason why that's important. And that goes back to the question you asked, which is what sort of guarantees do we have to protect the human rights of individuals that are at stake? Article 14 of the Ghanaian Constitution guarantees the liberty of every individual. Even people that we have incarcerated or properly so-called convicted of different kinds of offenses under the laws of Ghana have got certain rights, and those liberties need to be protected while they are still in incarceration. So granted that these individuals, for example, fall foul of the law, and again, I did talk about that law in Article 14, there are exceptions to that, where, the liberty can be clamped on, and one of the exceptions is where you have individuals that are being moved from one country to another and they're just using Ghana as a transit point, like you have in this particular case, where they can then be held. However, the agreement and the conditions under which they are going to be held is what must be opened up for scrutiny. In the absence of that, I find it quite strange that the government may say, for instance, that they're going ahead to expand the number. But I did say that nobody is actually going to challenge that. What you have is an action that has been brought by the plaintiffs for the violation of their personal rights of the High Court. And that's perhaps a right that they're entitled to. So very interesting to see how that turns out. Should they be treated in any way that is not in accordance, with the dictates of international human rights law, international humanitarian law, and also the laws of the country? I want to see a case where the High Court, gets involved and calls the government to order, to the extent that we can provide some evidence for that kind of an arrangement.
Okay.
And perhaps the third thing I'd say is that we must equally understand that this is, and I think Professor did allude to that this is coming off the back of a heel of, geopolitical arrangements that you've had with these countries that are in the West, seemingly a bit more powerful economically, if you can put it that way, that tend to use some very interesting means to strong armed countries in the global South to try to reverse engineer, the challenges that they've had regarding migrants. They may have their own processes and their own, arrangements, but again, these must all be within the confines of what the law requires. I don't think our Ghanaians will be up in arms if this, for example, has been done in accordance with the law, if this, for instance, has been
absolutely,
done
Patrick,
to the rights of the individuals at play.
Well, Patrick, sadly, time is not on our side, but thank you so much, gentlemen, for speaking to us and sharing your experts' thoughts on this. Dr. Oliver-Barker Bah, Presidential Research Professor of Sociology, Northern Illinois University in the U.S., and also Patrick Stephenson, Policy Analyst in Accra, Ghana. Thank you so much once again.